Good afternoon, everyone. Maria, should we get started or give it a minute or two?
Let's see. I think we're up to 37 participants. I would go on and get started.
Okay, great, we will. Well, thank you everybody for attending today. We know that we are the last presentation that's standing between you and getting your weekend started. So thank you very much for attending. We really appreciate it. A little bit about us before we get started. My name is Danielle Apfelbaum, and I am the Scholarly Communication Librarian at Farmingdale State College, which is in Suffolk County, New York. And I received my Creative Commons certification back in October of 2018.
And my name is Derek Stadler. I'm an associate professor at LaGuardia Community College, which is in Long Island City, which is in Queens, New York City. I'm also the web services librarian at the college. And I also do some work in scholarly research, and that's been published in the Journal of Library Administration and the Journal of Interactive Technology and Pedagogy. And I've also done some history research as well. And I am the co-editor in chief of the Open Access Journal, Urban Library Journal.
So before we get started, we do have our little disclaimer because we're going to be talking about things like copyright and Creative Commons licensing. We just want to remind you that we are not lawyers and we are not providing legal advice. This presentation is for informational purposes only. And if you need a legal answer to a question that involves copyright or Creative Commons, we do encourage you to consult an attorney on that matter. So today we're going to be going over a lot. We're going to be talking about how copyright and the Creative Commons licenses work together to protect authors' rights while also communicating additional permissions to users. We're going to talk about how to identify and interpret each of the 6 Creative Commons licenses and how those materials may or may not be used. And then I'll provide you with a nice list of some resources that you can explore if you want to check out locating some Creative Commons licensed material. So before we can talk about the licenses, the Creative Commons licenses, we need to talk a little bit about copyright. So what's actually protected by copyright? In a nutshell, copyright can be extended to anything that's fixed in tangible form. So meaning that the work is in some kind of textual, visual, or audio format. However, this doesn't extend to processes or inventions, which would be covered most likely by patent law, nor does it apply to words or images that identify brand names of a company or a service provider. That's something that would be covered under trademark law. So just to be absolutely clear, we're not going to be talking about patent law or trademark law today. We're just going to focus on the relationship between Creative Commons and copyright. So the rights of the copyright holder. Once a work is fixed in tangible medium, the copyright holder has 6 exclusive rights, meaning that the copyright holder has the right to carry out these 6 activities. Anyone other than the copyright holder who wants to be able to carry out one of these activities must ask for and obtain permission from the copyright holder before doing so. And this includes reproducing a work or making copies of it. And it is very important to remember when you're in the digital realm, downloading something is part of making a copy. I know sometimes when we deal with faculty, they don't realize when you're downloading it, you're making a copy of it. So that's one thing to keep in mind in the digital realm. It also includes preparing derivative works. So this means that if you write a book, you need to give permission to somebody else if they want to turn it into a play. Or if you write a textbook and somebody wants to adapt that textbook into a workbook, that person who doesn't hold the copyright needs to ask the copyright holder for the textbook if they can create that derivative work. Without the copyright holder's permission, you also can't distribute copies of the work. And finally, if it's a visual work or a work that can be staged, you can't display the work or perform the work in public or via digital transmission without the copyright holder's permission. And this all comes from Title 17. I have shared the slides in the chat, so everything you'll be able to access today. And if you actually want to go to the text of copyright law, which is, I think, close to 400 pages, you can use the links right in the slides. So Creative Commons, what is Creative Commons? Creative Commons was launched in 2002, and it's a legally enforceable mechanism for basically saying, hey, I know that as the copyright holder, I'm entitled to these 6 exclusive rights, but I'm willing to allow you to use my work in a certain way if you meet certain conditions. As of 2017, over 1 billion works were licensed under a Creative Commons license. So it's likely that if you haven't already encountered these licenses, you will in the future. And understanding how they work in concert with copyright to expand usage for consumers is really important for libraries, especially when we have to make decisions about whether we can make and distribute copies of these items in physical or digital format, as we are sometimes asked to do. Now, one thing that is really important to remember as we go into an overview of Creative Commons licenses is that copyright and Creative Commons work hand in hand. It's a common myth that when you license a work openly, you have to waive your copyright to it, but that just isn't true. Creative Commons, again, is simply a mechanism for communicating to users that if their use meets the criteria specified by the license, they do not have to request permission from the copyright holder for that use. If their intended use doesn't meet those requirements, then they'll need to request permission from the copyright holder.
Each license is comprised of conditions that indicate to users what they can or cannot do with your work. We'll go over the individual conditions, and then we'll take a look at the 6 licenses, which are comprised of 1 or more of these conditions. The first condition is attribution. All CC licenses require that others who use your work in any way must give you credit the way you request, but not in a way that suggests you endorse them or their use. If they want to use your work without giving you credit or for endorsement purposes, they must get your permission first. The second condition is the share alike condition. This condition allows you to give permission to others to copy, distribute, display, perform, and modify your work. Give as long as they distribute any modified work on the same terms. If they want to distribute modified works under other terms, they must get your permission first. The third condition is the non-commercial condition. This condition allows you to give permission to others to copy, distribute, display, perform, and, unless you have chosen no derivatives, modify and use your work for any purpose other than commercially, unless they get your permission first. The fourth condition is the no derivatives condition. This condition allows you to give permission to others to copy, distribute, display, and perform only original copies of your work. If they want to modify your work, they must get your permission first.
So the CCBY, or the attribution license, is the least restrictive of all the open licenses, requiring only that users cite the original creation. If you're familiar with David Wiley's 5 R's of OER, this is a license that enables each of those 5 R's to happen. So first, users can retain the item, meaning that they can make, own, and control copies of the content. Second, users can reuse the item, meaning that, again, they can use it in a variety of ways. They can revise the item, meaning that they can adapt, adjust, modify, or alter the content. They can remix the item, meaning that the user can combine the original or revised content with other material and create something new with it, like a mashup. And finally, users can redistribute the item, meaning that the user can share copies of the original content, copies of revised content, or copies of content that's been remixed with other materials. With the CCBY, or the Creative Commons Attribution license, a user has permission to do all of these things so long as the user credits the original creation. The CCBY SA, or Attribution Share Alike license, allows users to reuse, retain, redistribute, remix, and revise the material for commercial or non-commercial purposes. However, a user must credit the original work and must license any modified versions of that work under the same or a compatible license. So what would this mean in practice? Let's say you have a faculty member who finds a textbook that's licensed under the Attribution Share Alike license. This instructor wants to use a chapter for one of her units, but first she wants to delete a few subsections, add a new subsection to cover a topic that hasn't been included in the original work, and she wants to crop and edit some of the existing photos that are used in the chapter. Then she wants to upload the text to her Blackboard course and deposit a copy in your institutional repository. The Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike license gives the user permission to do all of this, so long as she licenses the modified version of the chapter under the same term when she shares it in her course or anywhere on the web. Essentially, a share alike license prevents somebody from modifying and distributing a work under more restrictive terms. The CCBY-NC, or the Attribution Non-Commercial License, allows users to reuse, retain, redistribute, remix, and revise the material. However, a user must credit the original work and use the work in a non-commercial nature. So again, what does this mean in practice? So we have two scenarios here. So let's say that we have a faculty member who teaches a music course at your institution and also teaches privately as a side gig. Let's say the instructor discovers a great handout on the Circle of Fifths on the web, and it carries an attribution non-commercial license. If the music instructor wants to alter the layout of the handout, make copies and distribute it to his students at a not-for-profit institution of higher education, such as a community college, the licensing allows the instructor to do so. However, if the same instructor wanted to take that modified item and then distribute it as part of his curriculum for the private lessons that he teaches as part of his side business, he would then need to reach out to the copyright holder to secure permission. Now, since we've gone over the attribution non-commercial and the attribution share alike licenses, you might have already guessed that the attribution non-commercial share alike license allows the user to reuse, retain, redistribute, remix, and revise the material. However, a user must credit the original work, the use itself must be non-commercial in nature, and any modified versions of the work must be licensed under the same terms or compatible terms. Again, we'll go over what this would mean in practice. So let's say that you are trying to teach a section of first-year nursing students how to read a scholarly article. You find the article licensed under an attribution non-commercial share alike license, which means you can mark up and annotate the article to your heart's desire without asking permission to make these modifications. That is, as long as your purpose is non-commercial in nature and you apply the same licensing terms to the annotated article when you share it out with your students, your colleagues, or in a repository on the web. Now, unlike the previous licenses we've covered, you will notice that we've lost some of those R's. The attribution non-derivative license allows you to reuse, retain, and redistribute the material for commercial or non-commercial purposes, so long as you credit the original work and share the material in its original form. Now, again, let's go back to that scenario where we considered the college music instructor who teaches a course at a community college and also gives music lessons as a side gig. If that great exercise on the Circle of Fifths handouts was licensed under an attribution no derivatives license, the instructor could make copies and distribute it to the students in both his college course and his private lessons, so long as he didn't modify the handout. If he wanted to modify and distribute the exercise in its modified form for commercial or non-commercial purposes, he would still have to obtain permission from the copyright holder first. Finally, the most restrictive of all the open licenses is the CCBY NCND, or the Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives License. Material with this license can be reused, retained, and redistributed, but only for non-commercial purposes, and again, only in its original form. So again, what does this look like in practice? If we return to that scenario where we considered the music instructor who teaches a college course and gives music lessons on the side, if he had that great handout with a CCBY NCND license attached to it, that instructor could make copies and distribute it as is only to the students in his college course. If he wanted to distribute it to the students to whom he gave private lessons, which would be a for-profit scenario, he'd have to ask the copyright holder for permission. Okay, I see a question about fair use. We're going to hold off on that question till the end, but we will come back to it. Absolutely. So finally, this is not a Creative Commons license. However, you may encounter some items with the public domain license on it. So it's not actually part of Creative Commons, but they do create like a label for it. So I did want to go over it. Public domain isn't unique to Creative Commons, but it is worth mentioning because it denotes an item for which either copyright has expired or for which the copyright holder has waived their rights to copyright. So works in the public domain can be reused, retained, redistributed, remixed, and revised without any restrictions. And attribution isn't required, but it is strongly recommended because we are, of course, librarians.
So we thought it would be helpful if you had a chance to think about the licenses in terms of real life library scenarios. So what we will do is read each scenario, give you a few minutes to think about it, and then we'll discuss the options given the scenario. Please put your answer, and this can include the thought process you use to arrive at each answer, in the chat, along with any questions you have about this scenario. Scenario number 1. You have a bio instructor at your college who recently located a laboratory manual licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution, No Derivatives, or CCBY ND license. The instructor plans to add a section and rework several of the sections to include photos from her lab. When she is done, she wants to deposit a copy in your institutional repository and would like you to link it from the catalog. Given the license on the original manual, can she do this? We'll give you a few minutes to think about it.
And please do put your guesses in the chat. One of the ways of getting familiar with the licenses is to work through how you might use them, how you might not use them. So definitely feel free to put your guess in the chat. Give another minute.
And you can even write down your thought process on how you came about your decision.
Great. Lots of guesses. Thank you for participating.
Yes,
So.
Participation counts. Well, you're all correct. The answer is no. Although she is using the material for non-commercial purposes, the no derivatives condition requires the item to be distributed as is. Unless the instructor receives permission from the copyright holder, she cannot modify and share out the work in its altered form. Then scenario number 2. You've been asked by a faculty member if you can make a PDF version of one of her textbooks available directly from the library catalog. We'll assume you can attach a file to a record. The book is licensed under a CCBY license. Can you do this? Once again, put your answer in the chat and maybe why you derived at that decision.
Again, thank you so much for your participation.
Yes, we like to see participation. We'll give some others another minute, okay? We see a lot of yeses.
One ditto.
One ditto, yeah. Yes, I'll give another minute. If there's any challenges. Last minute challenge.
Well, that's a good question, Shannon. We'll come back to that after the scenarios.
Yes. All right. So, yes, you're correct. Yes is the answer. You can do this because the CCBY license gives users permission to make and distribute original and modified versions of the item. Yes, thank you for participating.
Okay, yeah, I was just going to say thank you for that. Yeah, it really depends on the situation. Depending on the item, the author may be asked to transfer. And it's important to understand too, even in cases where there's a Creative Commons license attached to an open access work, before that is published, let's say in a scholarly open access journal, it may require the author to transfer copyright to the publisher before that. So one of the easiest ways to do this is just look for the copyright note. I've noticed in a lot of open access publication, it either says copyright the publisher or it says copyright just the author. So I would take it on an item by item basis to determine who owns the copyright.
Scenario number 3. Let's revisit the first scenario. After delivering the disappointing news to your bio instructor about being unable to modify and share out a laboratory manual with a CCBY ND license, the same bio instructor locates another laboratory manual licensed under the CCBY NC SA license. The instructor plans to add a section and rework several of the sections to include photos from her own lab. When she is done, she wants to deposit a copy in your institutional repository and would like you to link it from the catalog. Given the license on the original manual, can she do this? Please put your answer in the chat and maybe why you came about that decision, and we'll give you a few minutes to think about it. It's maybe a tough one.
Yes, Becky, it's a lot of information on a Friday afternoon. Totally understand. And also we should say, again, it's a lot of information. If you have any questions, we do provide our contact information at the end of these slides. So please do not hesitate at all to send us an email. If you want to work through a scenario that you're facing, we are happy to help you with that too. Just send us each an email and we're happy to help.
Anybody have any guesses? No? Okay. Okay, so we have one yes, thinks she can this time. Somebody says no because she changed it. Another person says yes, I assume.
Let's see. What is
see.
the answer, Derek?
All right, so the answer is yes. First, the instructor satisfies the non-commercial condition. Second, all of the conditions permit modification. As long as the instructor credits the original work and applies a share-alike condition to the modified version of the original manual, the instructor can do all of the above.
Some great guesses. Thank you all for
Yes.
participating. So we have, what is this? This is our last scenario.
Okay, scenario number 4. An instructional designer and a member of the English faculty have teamed up and created a 15-page workbook for organizing peer review groups in a technical writing course. Your colleagues want to deposit a copy of the workbook in an open education resource repository, but they're worried they might miss out paid opportunities if they just give it away. They don't mind if other instructional designers or English faculty use it in campus workshops, but they don't want to see it incorporated in for-profit workshops or publications. Given their concerns, which license would you advise for their work?
It's a tricky one. We've had
Yes.
yes, no questions. Now we're actually asking you
Yes.
to pick a
Now it's-
license.
Now it's your turn to pick a license. Okay, we have a CCBYNC. Give some others to think about it. CCBYNCSA.
Some good answers coming in.
Yes, yes.
All right, last call.
Last call, yes. Okay, we'll give it another second. All right, we have another. All right. Okay. All right, so one person got it correct. It is CCBYNCND. Okay, for these two, all right, that license would be the best option. The non-commercial condition ensures that any for-profit user would require permission from the copyright holder. And the no derivatives condition ensures that their signature process for running small peer review groups in technical writing courses won't be altered and redistributed.
Yeah, I think we had a couple who got that one.
Yes.
So yeah,
Way to go, Yan.
good job, everyone. So I hope you found these scenarios helpful. I often find that just presenting, this is the definition of this Creative Commons license, is often not that helpful, but I think sometimes thinking through real scenarios you might encounter sort of helps you understand better how you might use these. Now, I have one resource that I highly recommend. This is a book that I believe it was put out through ACRL. It is the Creative Commons for Educators and Librarians text. I took the Creative Commons certification course, and I can tell you, having done that, this book is essentially every single unit in that course. So if you go and access this book, which is openly licensed and freely available, unless you want it in print, then you have to pay for it, but you can access it from this slide, and it is a terrific resource. If you look at nothing else, have this on hand, because it will really help you if you have to deal with some Creative Commons licensing questions. Now, we've kind of come to the end of our session, and I'm not going to go through every single resource, but there are some resources that you're going to definitely want to have in your toolbox when you're looking for materials that are licensed under a variety of Creative Commons licenses. And for books, I highly recommend for journals and books, I recommend the Directory of Open Access Journals, the Directory of Open Access Books, OpenStax, Open Textbook Library. BC Open Campus is great, and also Rebus Community, not so much for the books, but for learning about all the different open projects that are going on. So for me, I find that Rebus Community helps because I can see who's putting out what textbooks or what's in the works, and I can let our faculty know in whatever particular disciplinary area they're in, so that, you know, if they're planning a course, they might want to take a look at that when it comes out. For finding just in general some instructional materials, Creative Commons search. Merlot is a repository for digital learning objects, but do be aware that one, it has Creative Commons licensed materials, but you have to specifically set the limiter to that. Otherwise, you may find things that are not openly licensed, but just openly available. So just be aware of that. OER Commons is a great place. And Oasis, which is a search engine that was created by my colleagues up in Geneseo at the State University of New York. They created their own OER search engine, which is just fantastic. I've linked to everything here. So I'm just going to go past the questions for a minute just to show you. In the slides, the links to every resource are available. And I've also, where I could, included a little GIF that shows you how to go through that site to find those resources. But yes, we have tons of resources. And that's a wrap for us. We're ready to take questions now. I do want to go back because there was a question earlier that I do want to get to. So I'm just scrolling back to that to make sure we don't miss it.
Yeah, Danielle, do you want me to read it out?
Sure.
Okay, this from Joseph. Could you talk about how often or in what circumstances an end user might make a fair use determination to do something not explicitly permitted by a certain CC license?
So I think it would be, it's the same scenario as when you're not dealing with something that's openly licensed. Fair use, you look at the purpose of the use, you look at its effect on the market, you look at, again, the nature of the use and the substantiality of, or the amount of the resource that you're using. So it really wouldn't be that much different. Trying to think of a circumstance. Do you have a particular example that we could work with?
Joseph, do you want to pop something in the chat? He says, not an example, but thanks for tackling the question.
Yeah, I mean, the process would still be the same. You would just apply the 4 factors the way you would, again, if you were dealing with something that was not openly licensed. So I really wouldn't see much different there.
Okay.
Difference there.
And Danielle and Derek, did you see Susan's question?
Yes.
Did you talk? Okay.
You know what? That one I have to double check again. I believe that is the one that creators can apply to indicate that they have waived it, but I may be incorrect. So that I would have to look up and get back to you.
Okay, thank you. And I have a quick question.
Sure.
Can you talk to a little bit at the very beginning when you were doing your introduction? You mentioned that you have a Creative Commons certification. I'm just curious about what that is and how you acquired it.
Yes, let me just double check to make sure that I put the links in here. Okay, I did actually include a link in the resource to the certificate program. The certificate program was, I want to say it was like a 12-week course. I did this 2 years ago now. It may be a little different, the format. I did it completely online. At the time, there was an in-person, I think 1 week intensive option. I don't know that that's available right now. But basically it was, like I said, all the information that's in the book that I linked to was basically all the information that was given to us in the units. And that was just accompanied by additional activities, which were graded by instructors in the program. So in addition to the information that's in that book, we went through a series of exercises. We, created openly licensed materials. We worked through what kinds of licenses we would use in particular scenarios. It gave a great deal of history on the Creative Commons, background. But like I said, everything, if you want to see what the content of that course is, just go back to that Creative Commons for Educators and Librarians book. That is basically, that's the content of the course.
Oh, that sounds fantastic.
And it was not as expensive. I believe I was in the first lot. They break it up into 2. I don't know if they do that anymore. There was one specifically for educators and one specifically for librarians. I did the librarian track. At the time, I believe it was $300. which was covered by my institution, thankfully. I believe now it's a little bit more expensive. I haven't checked back, but the last time I looked, it was up to $5. I don't know if that's still the case, but there is a fee associated with the certification course, so just be aware of that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Just sort of watching the chat for a second. Okay. Going once, going twice. Oh. Okay.
Yes. Oh, I
Well,
just wanted to follow up. The CCO, that is the license that you apply when you're waiving it. So that's the indication, not that it's expired and gone into the public domain, but that you as the creator are waiving your right to copyright.
okay. Thank you. Thank you. I'm just going to wrap up right quick since we don't seem to have any more questions. As a reminder, the session has been recorded and a recording and slides will be made available in the coming weeks. If you have any more questions, please reach out to our speakers via email. Thank you everyone for attending the session and to the speakers for their great presentation. You guys did terrific. I really learned a lot. This is the last session of the day. So I also want to thank everyone for attending this year's virtual NC Serials Conference. Please be on the lookout for the conference evaluation that should be coming soon. And I just want to wish everyone a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you for having us, and thank you all for participating with the scenarios. We appreciate it.
Thank you.